Harvard Medical School, the number one medical school, not only in the US, but around the world, and the dream of so many students in the US and outside the US. Abra has made it into this school, the amazing Harvard Medical School. And today she's going to share with us her experience getting into Harvard.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. My name is Shen. I'm currently a plastic surgery intern at the University of Washington in Seattle. I'm originally from Toronto. I grew up there, but I was born in the US. So I grew up in Toronto. I finished high school there, and then I came to the United States for college. I went to MIT and I studied neuroscience and theater. And then I was lucky enough to get into medical school at Harvard. So I stayed in Boston for medical school. I'm excited to talk to you guys about the process for getting into medical school and hopefully give you some helpful advice.
That's awesome. So MIT is another phenomenal college to get into. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience of what you think are the main factors that help you get into Harvard Medical School, and then we'll go discuss the details of each.
I think getting into medical school, there are lots of different components to it. There's your numbers, so your MCAT, your GPA, but there are also some extracurriculars that are very important. A lot of people think that it's good to be pointy, very, very good at one thing, an expert in one thing. I think it's better to be a little well-rounded. Music or the arts, sports, some volunteer community service work that you're passionate about. If you can tap into all of those different things and make an impact in a lot of different areas, I think that is better to show that you are well-rounded and you're interested in more than just one thing. For me, like I said, I double majored in theater. So I think I had some creative, different aspect to my application that wasn't just science-based. But then I also did a lot of service work with cancer patients and that community. And then I did some research, and I did also a varsity sport. So if you're able, I would try to do as many different things as possible to show how great you are, to show that you're a diverse applicant.
Wow, that's phenomenal. And to explain to our viewers who might not be familiar with the process, especially international students, in most international schools, you go directly from high school to medical school based on a specific score. In the US, you go to college first, and then you do all these things that Abra mentioned, including the MCAT score, which helps get you into medical school. So in comparison to these other schools, they have one specific exam. Based on the score, you get in. Can you tell us how valuable is MCAT? MCAT could be the most similar to this process. How valuable is it? Is it the only component, the major component? What if somebody scores high, scores low? What is the good score for the MCAT for someone to get into medical school?
In the US and sometimes in Canada, actually, the main standardized test you take is the MCAT. Back when I took it, it was out of 45, and now I think it's out of 525. There are multiple different subjects on the exam which you have to prepare for, and they recently added psychology and I think maybe sociology or something like that. But it is like the one number that you get that is in your control because you can study for it. The other number that's really important for your application is your GPA or your school average. And that is more of a culmination of your entire college experience, so 3 or 4 years, whereas your MCAT is this one day of testing that really can make a big impact on your application. Typically for top schools, I think if you get in the 80th or 90th percentile, that would be awesome. And based on my mentorship and counseling of other students, we thought a 520 would mean you're very, very solid. I personally didn't do that great on the MCAT. Out of 45, I got a 35. And I thought, oh my gosh, do I have to retake this exam to try to increase my chances? But it's always a combination of your MCAT and your GPA together. So if you have a really, really high GPA, there might be a little bit of a leeway in your MCAT. Whereas if you just totally destroy the MCAT, that might be able to make up for, a couple B's or C's that you got in college. So it's a combination of both of them.
And that's actually good to hear because it's kind of similar to the step 1, step 2 CK process, where step 1 is very important. But if you didn't do well, maybe you do other things like research, step 2 CK that kind of adjust that. Because at the end of the day, as now you seeing a residency, I see a residency, these skills that you build through taking exams does not actually apply in real life all the time. Like it's totally different working in a hospital and sitting for 8 hours solving questions. Absolutely. So I totally understand the perspective of medical school commissions and residency application commissions that it's not the most important thing. There are way more important other things that should be considered when taking an applicant, not just score.
Definitely. I think a lot of people freak out about the score because it's hard to change. Once you get the score, it's a number that's there, but there are always other parts. If you didn't do that well on the MCAT, you have your GPA in terms of numbers, but you also have your extracurriculars, your volunteering, your research, etc., that can really help make your application stand out too.
Okay, so MCAT and GPA are the kind of numbers that people can look at, because the other things are activities that we'll talk about. But the numbers, GPA and MCAT, try to score as high as you can on both. But if you couldn't on one, try to adjust with the other. And if you couldn't with both, you have to work on other parts of your application. So now let's move to research. I assume that research plays a part in your application to medical school. Can you tell us about your experience in research? What, from mentoring other students, what do you feel the value of research when applying to medical school?
I think research is a great way to distinguish yourself, because not everyone does research. And research, there are ways to show achievement, meaning presenting at conferences or getting publications. So if you're able to spend a couple of years in the lab, you have something to show for it, which is great for your application. I started doing research in high school. I was lucky enough to get accepted to a high school research program, and I really, really liked it. So when I went to MIT for college, I thought, okay, I want to get involved in research again. There are so many different things that you could research, like hundreds, thousands of different topics. So find something that you're interested in. I picked something similar to my major in neuroscience. I think if you have a particular clinical interest, it would make sense to do research in that. And then you can sort of build a narrative or an arc for your personal statement about why you're interested in medicine. But I started doing research, I think, in my maybe first or second year of college, and I kept doing it until I graduated. And in all that time, like 2-3 years, I think I got like one publication, and that was it. But just having one thing shows that you've done something and you've had good progress and made an impact. So I think it's, in addition to picking an interesting topic, pick something where you're going to have a good mentor, either a postdoc or your PI, where they can really mentor you and support you. Because if you are able to get support so that you can publish something, that would really, really benefit your application, even if it's just one paper.
That is a great point, because people think that they're going to go and work for like a week or two and get like a paper, but that is totally not true. Because I've done research. In my whole research course, I discussed this idea that you need to get the experience first, especially if you're applying from college to medical school, not even a medical student. You're not going to expect to run like randomized clinical trials or run a basic science lab. So start small, start with like a project. You have to get the experience. And this is, by the way, some people don't know that even if you get the experience without the publication, that is something you can add on your CV, because people understand that most research don't get published, especially in basic science. So even if you don't get a publication, that's fine. Get the experience. If you get a publication, that's even better, because as you said, you got something done. But
exactly.
Even if you didn't get it because some extraneous factors, sometimes it's not in your hand. Your PI has not reviewed the paper yet, or the project has not worked, or you need to do it again, but now you got into medical school. So there are so many other factors that can play a role in you getting the publication at the end of the day.
Definitely. And even if you can't get a publication, if you're able to present it, even if it's only at your own college's research day, just to have some experience presenting. But I think one of the biggest benefits of doing research is that research is hard. So you will face challenges, and medical schools love asking about a challenge you faced or a problem that you solved. So even doing research and engaging with that and going through a lot of hard difficulties, you can talk about that in your application, in your interview. So even if you don't have a publication, you'll get experience that you can discuss.
Definitely. And of course, letters of recommendation that you can get from your research mentor, connections that somebody knows someone in the commission that can help you, committee that can get you in. So research has so many factors that can help you get into medical school or even residency.
Definitely.
Awesome. So now talking about the other aspects of your application, let's start with sports or music, art, things related to hobbies or interests that you can make a story of. What do you think is the value of that when applying to medical school? And what do committee members that choose applicants for medical school, why do they value these experiences, and do they really look at them?
Overall, I think, as we discussed earlier, being well-rounded is just so important. Thousands of people apply to medical school every year. Many of them have really good test scores and really good numbers. But what medical schools want is to build a class of interesting people who are going to be great to learn from each other, contribute to the class culture, and eventually have a great reputation in the future to reflect well on the medical school. So I think that there are lots of different extracurriculars that you could have. There's the clinical volunteering, there's non-clinical volunteering, there's sports, there's music. There are just so many different ways to distinguish yourself. You could be really good at knitting, but at least knitting is some sort of hobby. What medical schools don't want are people who just study all day, get really good GPA, really good MCAT scores, but if they were a medical student, they would not really contribute to the class community or the class culture. So I think that's why they really care about recruiting people who have hobbies and who are interesting outside of just numbers. A lot of my friends try to do a sport, and that's how they distinguish themselves. You could do music, whether you play an instrument or if you're in an a cappella group, for example. If you're an artist, you could do that. Whatever you're passionate about, however you like to spend your time, just show them that. And the best ways to do that are to dedicate time to doing that. So for example, if you are a piano player, it's so much easier to say, like, I play piano in this musical group than just I play piano as a hobby, because in one of those ways you have proof, you have evidence that you dedicated time to do that instead of just like doing it at home as a hobby. If you like playing soccer, join an intramural soccer team or the school soccer team, then you're actually dedicated. You're showing that you're putting in the time, you're disciplined instead of just like doing it on the side in your free time.
That is a great point, especially that when you're doing at home versus with a team, with someone, that can show how you like to give to community when you play to the public, how you want to be a team player with working with the other people as a sports or in music. And I like the point that you mentioned about do something you like, because some people just do things because they want to add lines on their CV, and that's not going to reflect well. You're not going to be passionate when you talk about these things on your interview. So do things that you actually enjoy, and don't say, oh, I don't like any sport, I don't like any music. There might be something that you haven't experienced yet. So try and experience new things and see what you're passionate about and go and pursue that.
Definitely.
Now I see, especially that I'm working in the hospital, I see many technicians, many nurses who are doing this as an interim job to get into medical school. What do you think of these, kind of experiences when somebody does college, they don't get into medical school, they do other things like these jobs before they apply? How valuable are these, and what do you recommend for someone who could not get from the first year?
I think it depends on why you think you didn't get in the first time. If someone doesn't get into medical school, I would recommend they take a really good look at their application and be really honest with themselves about why they didn't get in. If they didn't get in because they didn't have the scores, then that's a deficit that you need to address. If they didn't get in because they didn't have enough clinical experience and they weren't able to convince the medical school committees that they understood what it was to become a doctor, they weren't able to communicate why they wanted to be a doctor, then I think doing some sort of clinical job or getting more clinical experience makes sense. If their research was lacking, if they really didn't have hobbies or extracurriculars, then that's another way to address your deficit. If someone has a ton of clinical experience already, for example, they volunteered a lot in a hospital or they did scribing or something like that, if that's not the deficit, then I wouldn't put in the time and energy to do that. And I would focus that time on something else to strengthen the application. But if that is where someone needs more help, then that definitely makes sense, and I would encourage that.
So if someone has done well in college, amazing scores, extracurricular activities, is it a must to do some shadowing of doctors or some clinical experience before you get into medical school?
I definitely think so. In fact, on the application for medical school, it specifically has a section for like clinical hours and shadowing or clinical experience and volunteering. Medical schools want to know that you know what you're getting into, because medical school is hard. Residency is hard. A lot of people dream about being doctors, but they don't really know what it's like. And so they want to know that you thought about your career. You're truly passionate about being a doctor because you know what that's like, or you have some idea of what that's like. And the only way someone can really know is by being in the clinical setting, experiencing that, working with doctors, working with nurses, seeing what doctors do. So I don't think it's really possible to understand what it is that you're committing to unless you put in shadowing hours or clinical hours. You don't know what it's like to be a doctor from watching Grey's Anatomy, right?
Exactly.
So, and medical schools know that. So it is very important to put in that time so you can see what it's like. And then you can always log all of your hours and put that in. So I think I logged maybe 200 or 300 hours shadowing or doing clinical volunteer work. And I think that helped convince the committee that I knew what I was talking about. I knew I was committed. I knew I wanted to be a doctor. So I would recommend that.
Oh, wow. 200 hours before even getting into medical school.
Yes.
So that's a great point, because you can also, whenever you're discussing your interview, in your interview, convincing people why you want to do medicine, that's like proof that you experienced all that and you're still convinced that this is your passion and your calling and what you want to do.
Exactly.
So if somebody is looking for these type of shadowing experiences, do the college arranges something for the students, or you have to look on your own? And what is the way to find these clinical experiences?
It depends on your college. Sometimes my college, at least, you could express interest in being part of the clinical shadowing experience, where you would say some specialties you were interested in, and then they would have alumni who are in the area, and they would pair you up with people, and then you could shadow them for a little bit. If they don't offer that, you can just reach out to doctors. You can just send them an email, say, hi, I'm a college student. I'm interested in seeing what it's like to be a physician. I would love to shadow you sometime. People love having people shadow them. A lot of doctors love their job. They would love to share that with you. And having a college student follow them around for an afternoon or a couple afternoons really isn't a burden. So if you're interested, if you know you're interested in cardiology or pediatrics or surgery, just find one and reach out to them. Even better if you have something in common with them, like if they went to your college or if you're from the same area. But most people will be very, very happy to have you shadow them. So just straight emailing them is useful.
Yeah, definitely. So now let's talk about the application process. Somebody have prepared everything. When does the application process generally start? How long does it take? Because in residency, it starts at the same time. You get the same response from all programs at the same time. How is it different from the medical school application?
You typically start preparing your application in the spring of the year before you apply. And that's the time when you start asking for recommendation letters, start thinking about your story and how you're going to write your personal statement. And then throughout the summer, some people say like by June or July, you should have everything finalized. And then you submit your application. The earlier you submit, the better, because once you submit your application, it can take weeks to get verified. And then once the longer you wait, the more people are in the queue to be verified. So do that as quickly as possible, ideally the week that applications open, which I think is June. Once you submit that, medical schools are very different. Some of them will receive all of their applications, review them on a certain date, and then release interview invitations starting in December or starting in November. Other medical schools follow rolling admissions, which means that they review applications as they come in real time. And so if you submitted your application in July, you could just get an interview 3 weeks later and have that interview be really, really early. And specifically in those situations, it's better to be on the early side so that you might get an offer before the spots fill up. So overall, it's better to submit early, even for whether it's for rolling admissions or standard admissions, just so that you can get verified early and then get into that pool earlier. You'll do interviews throughout the fall and the early winter. And then if it's rolling, you might get an offer soon after. For example, I interviewed on a Thursday at a school and found out on Tuesday, 4 days later. Or sometimes you might interview in October and you won't even find out until April. So it just really depends. But throughout this time, you should be ready to check your email at all times, be doing interview preparation, and just being patient with the process because it can take a long time.
So the interviews come at different dates, and the offers to get into medical school can also come at different dates. So what if I'm waiting, for example, a response from Harvard and I got an offer from Hopkins? Can I make one wait until I know about the other and then decide to go there, or how does it work?
Yes, so you could have a choice. You could get 50 different offers from medical schools, and all of them have some notification date that is much later in the spring. So you can wait to see everything that you get and then weigh all of your options and then decide later in, I think it's like April 30th or something like that. Some
Oh,
medical schools might have a little earlier, a little bit of a later date, but you definitely have the luxury of receiving as many offers as possible to see your options. Whereas in residency, you open an envelope and you're assigned a program on match day. So this is very, very different, where you can see what you get and then decide. If you're on a wait list, that can be trickier, but you should commit to a medical school while waiting on a wait list if you would rather go there. And sometimes I've even heard people getting off the wait list the week before med school starts.
oh
So
wow.
then you can keep your hopes up and hope it works out. But at least if you have another option, you would have a backup or be
So if
committed
you
to.
committed to a school and you're on wait list and they told you now you can come in, can you like withdraw the first option that you committed to?
I think you can, yeah, because that's what happened for the waitlist spot to open, right? Like
Somebody, yeah.
that opened because someone else picked something else. So it's not ideal, and the earlier notification you can give, the better. But medical schools do have wait lists open for this event.
Which one did you prefer personally when applying to both med school and residency? Which system you liked more?
Oh, medical school is way better. So, because, well, I think for plastic surgery interviews, all of your interview invitations came in on one day. That was great because you could, you knew just one day you had to be very stressed, but then you would kind of know what you had in terms of interview offers. Whereas for medical school, you could get an interview one day and then not hear from another school for weeks before you get your second interview offer. And then during those 4 weeks, you might be freaking out thinking, oh my gosh, what if I don't get any more interviews? So I think the notification for interview releases was better for residency, but being able to see your options and really weighing the pros and cons, discussing with your family, having time to think about your medical school offers, that was amazing.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Because in residency, you might be spending so much time thinking about the program and writing 5 programs, and they're not even considering you.
Right.
That's the good thing about application in medical school. You know that this school wants me. Do I want to go there or not?
Yes, exactly.
So now briefly about the personal statement. What do you think we should include in personal statement when applying to medical school, and how valuable it is as a part of the application?
I think the personal statement is crucial to your application. And I've heard of stories where people got interviews because their personal statement was so compelling. My advice for personal statements is to try to use this opportunity to paint a story of your journey about where you started and how it brought you to wanting to become a doctor. People talk about having story arcs or themes. I think those are great. For example, if you have one common thread in many of your experiences that explain why you're interested in being a physician, for example, that could be global health or global work in general, and just finding different experiences in your life to support your story. So, for example, if you're interested in global work, if you are not from the US, that's something that's related. If you did some research in global health, if you were able to do a volunteer trip abroad, if you've shadowed, those are all 4 totally different things that are kind of similar, and you can find a common thread to build your story and your narrative. If you don't have a really easy theme to bring it all together, it doesn't have to be like a medical topic. It doesn't have to be global health. It could be, for example, really caring about contributing to your community. So maybe you volunteered at food banks, you did some research in community health, you volunteered or you shadowed for a doctor that takes care of patients who experience homelessness. Those are not as clearly related, but there is a common thread, which is that you care about your community. So when I advise people, I ask them to sit down, think about the important experiences in their life, whether it's volunteering, the arts, sports, the research, and come up with related themes and ideas of each of them and see if you can find that common thread to bring everything together. And if you can't, that's totally okay. Most people probably don't. It's better if you do, just because it makes the story easier. But even if you can't, having some sort of chronological, compelling argument that explains where you started and how you got to where you are and why you want to be a physician, that's really the goal of the personal statement. So make sure it's well written, get an editor, get Dr. Assad to help you out there. But yeah, you should, that is one part of your application that is totally within your control to make it spectacular. So really, really put in the time to make that perfect.
Yeah, and some people think that they're gonna write a personal statement within a few hours, and that's not the case. Exactly. Yeah, I've seen some people, oh, I've tried like for 4 hours and I haven't gotten anything. Well, you know, my personal statement for residency, it went through V20, which means like it went through 20 drafts. So I wrote one and it went through 20 drafts. So just to give you an idea of, if you really want to like have a spectacular personal statement, you have first to, as Ebra mentioned, write the bullet points. Look at your story. It's like you're summarizing your whole 20 years or 25 years in that one single paper, maybe one page. So make sure you understand, you try to summarize all these experiences in bullet point. Then you have to pick, because you can't include everything. So you have to pick what stories, and then definitely if you don't think it looks amazing, get an editor. Even if you think it's amazing, get an idea, get like opinion of someone. Maybe they give you one single point that can make a difference in somebody's eyes when they are looking at your application. And we definitely can help with that. If somebody wants to us to have a look at your personal statement, check that in the description below. We'll have the link for that, and we have a blog about that as well.
Great.
So for interview preparation, what do you think is important to convey when you're interviewing?
When I prepared for interviews, I sat down and I thought, what are the 3 key things I want them to know about me in every single interview? So I thought, okay, I really want them to know that I did theater because I thought it would make me seem interesting. So I would think of different stories and experiences that I could tell to swerve the conversation towards what I wanted to talk about. And then I just 3 key things, and I wrote them down. And I just looked at it right before my interview. And then that was my goal. I thought it was really important to practice interviewing with people. Sometimes it's a little awkward to practice interviewing with your friends because you're a little self-conscious. For me, our medical school had a pre-med advisor or pre-med counselor, and they offered mock interviews. And that was really helpful because they're like a real adult and they don't know you. So it's easier to take it more seriously. Some people I know, they talk to their parents as friends. So it's still like a little bit of some power difference, a little bit of awkwardness in a good way to help them practice their answers. And I think it's not only about practicing answering questions, but also like your delivery. So before even going to a mock interview with someone else, I would anticipate really common questions. For example, what's your biggest weakness? And I would sit there and I would think, how could I answer this question, and practice it on my own, saying it out loud so I could hear if it sounded natural or if it sounded, if I was telling the story right. So I would say practice on your own first out loud. Think about what stories you want to tell, what ideas and main points about yourself you want to convey, and then practice with a real person, whether it's friends or an advisor or something else like that.
Yeah, great point. And if somebody, again, need help with interview preparation, let us know and we'll happy to help you with that. So we're approaching the end of this interview. Abra, did I miss any questions that are relevant to medical school application, or any final advice to anyone who's trying to get into medical school, especially the competitive ones like Harvard?
Getting into medical school can seem really daunting because there are so many other amazing people applying to medical school, but have confidence in yourself. You've lived almost 20 years, maybe. You've had great experiences. You've faced challenges. You've overcome. You've had achievements. So just have faith in what you've done. And your job now is to figure out how to sell yourself and how to make a beautiful package to show why you're truly interested in being a doctor. If you can convey that passion in your writing, in your experiences, in your interview, then I know you'll do well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Abra, for your time. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to our viewers about your amazing experience. Now, hearing your story and what you've done No wonder that you matched at IT, at Harvard, at your #1 choice plastic surgery residency. Thank you again so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
For our viewers, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below, and me and Abra will make sure to answer all your questions. And if you want to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook page, Malki Assad MD, thank you again so much for watching, and see you in future videos.